Well, right now we have Mark Phillips on the line. Hi, Mark. How are we doing?
I'm doing very well, Dr. Stan. How about yourself, sir?
Doing just fine, thanks. And for those of you who don't know Mark, why don't you sort of introduce yourself to our listeners out there and tell them about your background and how you got involved with the intelligence agencies?
Well, I better start with the last thing first, because when Vietnam was heating up and everybody was getting drafted that I knew, it was just a matter of time before I was going to be drafted, because my grades weren't that good. So I got drafted. But before, I was actually inducted into the military while I was getting my physical in Alabama, as a matter of fact, Montgomery. They called out my name and asked me to identify myself, which I did. And I was escorted back to where there was a bunch of military brass and some guys with suits on, with no name tags or anything on their suits.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to go to a break here, but ladies and gentlemen, this is when, of course, they asked Mark if he'd like to go to Vietnam or he'd like to join the intelligence agencies. Well, of course, nobody wanted to go to Vietnam, and so he joined the intelligence agencies, and, well, the rest is history. We'll be back in a moment. Mark, you go right ahead.
Yeah, that was a good rap. Yes, as a matter of fact, that's exactly what happened. And I suppose the good news was I was able to continue on with school. I had a really good job that I enjoyed very much, because I had to have a cover job. And I really wasn't doing anything for the intelligence community for at least 2 years. I did go through some intense schooling on how to do what I was going to be doing, which was keeping secrets, basically. And I stayed with it until 1988, and I saw something that completely changed my mind, Dr. Stan. I'd already stepped aside. I was getting out of the intelligence community completely, and but on the other flip side of the thing, you never really, as long as you're alive, you never really get out, because that is, unless they want to throw you out, and not many people survive that. The point was, though, I had an opportunity to start a joint venture company in the People's Republic of China, and the fellow that wanted me to do the honors of going over there and putting the deal together, he was in the country music business. I had never heard of him, because even though I was born and raised in Nashville, I was never a country music fan. Nevertheless, when I got over there, we put the deal together. I was the president of the company, and we had an enormous manufacturing facility that we were dedicating in the Shenzhen province of the industrial province of China. And at the ribbon-cutting ceremonies that evening, I was approached by a Chinese intelligence officer. Cut right to the chase. The Chinese intelligence officer showed me a file, my own file, and I thought, well, this is typical. Someone's going to try to blackmail me, and it's not going to work. And in fact, that wasn't at all the reason they showed it to me. They showed it to me so that I could know that their sources of information were impeccable. Well, I'd say they were, because some of the documents that I saw in there are strictly classified at this very day, and they looked very, very much like originals. You could actually see the paper on the back, whether you could see the imprint of the letters. The point is, the next thing this man showed me...
Hold that thought. We'll be back here in just a moment with Mark Phillips. Well, this is Dr. Stan. I guess it's Mark Phillips, who started out during the Vietnam War with the intelligence agencies, and he was with them up until about 1988, when, of course, he was approached, certainly by this gentleman who they wanted to open up an industry, a company in China that had to do with music, and I suppose they were going to be producing certainly DVDs, records, things of that sort. And suddenly at a meeting in China, why, of course, Mark was approached by a man who was with the Chinese intelligence service, and the fellow from the Chinese intelligence service had a copy of the Mark Phillips file, intelligence file. In fact, there was a lot to suggest this was the original American intelligence file. So go ahead, this gentleman from the intelligence, Chinese intelligence, has accosted you at a meeting, and what did he tell you? And what did they want from you?
Well, let me add one thing. It didn't have anything to do with the music industry. It had something to do with the fact the Chinese were now that our bamboo curtain was down, they needed more energy, and they were not set up or structured for it at that time. So they wanted to try everything that they could use to curb some of their use and to conserve. One of those things was large capacitor banks that they could use in mining, so they wouldn't have to shut the mines down, every other day or working 3 or 4 hours a day. Very expensive. It's like shutting a glass plant down. So they were most interested in this. It's really ancient technology, though they were more interested in some of the equipment that was used to produce these large capacitors, and I could easily get that information to them legally, and I did. And we had an agreement, all signed, sealed, and delivered. But there was one problem. I had a partner in the United States. That was the fellow that originally recruited me to become the president of that company. That country music fellow. His name was Alex Houston. Alex Houston was an MC of sorts. He had he was a ventriloquist. He had a ventriloquist act, and he really wasn't much of a name in the country music business for sure, but he certainly did rub elbows with all of the big ones. And this intelligence officer told me that it's Alex Houston fellow, and then he started showing me all his information and pictures and everything else. He said, "This gentleman, this partner of yours, has got to go. We have to get rid of him. He is involved in child and adult pornography, which is punishable by death in China. He is also in the drug business, which is also punishable by death in China." And he said, and he also has connections that go all the way to the White House. And that was the only part that I couldn't believe. I could believe everything else. And he showed me pictures of Alex Houston actually sexually engaged with a terrified little boy. So I told him that I needed to think about this more and look into it, but I would certainly cooperate and make sure that Alex Houston wasn't a part of our joint venture. Well, when I came back, first thing I did was notify the Department of State, someone I had a good, reliable contact, and let them know what was going on, and expected them to push it along the other channels, just in case Alex Houston was involved in the intelligence community, and I didn't know it. Well, turns out I got another call back shortly thereafter, told me to forget it. It didn't happen. Well, you don't forget something like that, and it did happen. And I was also told by the Chinese intelligence officer, too, that Alex Houston had a woman and a small child in his charge. And he said he controls them both, and he uses the woman, he prostitutes her, and he makes child pornography with the child. So I said, well, okay, fine. So I get back, I find out that this is most likely true, and I find out that my own government is participating in it and wants to cover it up. So that's when I got interested in talking to some friends of mine deep within the intelligence community, and they told me the same thing. They said, "Mark, there's nothing you can do about this. It's not representative of everybody. You know that. It's just that we've got a lot of, power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. We got a lot of people like that in Washington."
And basically what we're really is saying, and probably Mark didn't realize at that time, but there's all sorts of sexual perversion. There's certainly both heterosexual and homosexual at the highest levels of our government. I don't think for 1 minute that many of our congressmen and senators are not homosexual, and many of our judges are as well. Why do you think the Supreme Court is making the decisions that it's making? They have their agents planted everywhere at the highest levels of this country, because behind everything going on there are powerful spiritual forces, and when you understand that, you will understand why I am so concerned, because of course, as Thomas Jefferson has said so well, you know, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and his justice will not sleep forever. But they're there, ladies and gentlemen. You see the manifestations of every day. You don't understand that these things are taking place because these depraved people are working at the highest levels of our government, and the good people can't do anything about it. Go right ahead.
Well, that's quite right, Dr. Stan. There was a term that a lot of people used when referring to someone's sexual orientation. They didn't necessarily say they were bisexual. Or bisexual or homosexual or straight. They called them trisexuals because there was nothing they wouldn't try.
And let me just point out that this explains what's going on in California. Those of you who don't know across the country, why they've just passed legislation here that if a little boy feels that he may be a little girl, why he has the right then to use the locker room with the girls, to shower with the girls, even though he's a boy. And the same thing is true with a little girl who feels like she's a boy. Why, she can go into the boys' shower room and certainly play the sports with the boys. And what sort of madness is this? Well, because what about the girls who object to having a boy showering and they're showering with them? Well, they're just going to have to understand that's the law. The law has been passed here, signed by our governor. We live in a world gone mad, and nobody wants to point out this is because America is a post-Christian, depraved nation. And I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and justice is coming on America very soon. Go right ahead.
Well, Dr. Stan, I couldn't agree more with you, as you well know. However, I do believe that when people talk to me about the pockets of decay in Washington, I would have to say that the entire hierarchy is decayed, period. There are a few people in Washington, politicians, that are good people. I don't know how they can stand working in that profession or working in that city. I don't know how they can deal with some of the decisions they see that are being made on a state level, like you just pointed out of what California's done. That is the most ridiculous thing. I really believe that's the most ridiculous law I've ever heard of in my life. About admitting or allowing a child to determine what the child's sexual preference is going to be, or orientation. I don't really think that's up to the child. I think the child needs to grow up and find out what is good and what is not, and what is right and what is wrong. But nevertheless, when I got back, I started checking with my intelligence officer friends, and one of them told me that this woman that Alex had control, or has control of, he said she's under my control. And I said, well, like what kind? He said, well, like whatever they want to do, they do, and she does it. They program her. I said, well, do you know what kind of programming? And he said, I've never been involved in that stuff. He said, all I know is they torture them. I said, trauma-based mind control went out hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. There's a few cults around the world that practice it to this very day. However, I cannot even fathom why anybody would use trauma-based mind control unless they're a sadist. Because I worked in the mind sciences, Dr. Stan. I dedicated most of my career life to it. And I never saw any trauma-based mind control. I saw the results of it in hospitals. I never saw any of it practiced. It's not necessary. There are much easier ways to externally control a mind, and there's much easier ways that don't harm the person whatsoever, that you can heal someone who has been programmed. You can give them back their minds and their memory. However, in this woman's case, her name was Cathy O'Brien, or Cathy Houston, I guess at the time. I was tipped off that Alex Houston was going to Boys Town. Now, all this happened in a matter of just a couple of days, 2 or 3 days. But he was going to Boys Town. That's where he went to vacation.
And I think basically you have to understand that Boys Town is used as a center of pedophilia. You're not going to hear this sort of thing, but this is the reality of what's going on. But go ahead.
It's a fact. Well, it's also a fact that the Catholic Church has spent a whole lot of money keeping the lawsuits down. And the government we've had so many officials that have partaken of that place and pushed themselves on those poor children that the law enforcement's not going to open that can of worms, it appears. Nevertheless, while he was away, I knew I was given the keys, in other words, a trigger to trigger her to come out of Alex Houston's place, take her child with her, and whatever she could put in a suitcase and meet me at a particular restaurant, which she did. And
well, let me just, for our listeners here, why I had a chance of meeting Cathy in the early 1990s, and she really didn't think very clearly. It was very obvious there was something wrong with her mind. Of course, through the years, we've gotten to know Cathy quite well, and she's a wonderful and charming lady, just a wonderful person. We meet her at meetings very frequently. This is not imaginary, ladies and gentlemen. The American tax dollars at work. We really have total corruption, depravity. And God is just, and His justice will not sleep forever. Go right ahead, Mark.
Well, Dr. Stan, from there, I got Cathy out. I rescued her, and 4 days after I had rescued her, all of my bank accounts were seized, and I had just received payment from the Chinese. Plus, I had all of my, they had bought stock in our stock in our company, and I was paid a royalty on it. The bottom line to all this was, I lost everything that I had worked for, everything that I had paid taxes on, inherited everything, because I lived a relatively modest lifestyle. But I had $2.2 million in the bank. That was a big mistake, because it disappeared instantly. And for all these years, since 1988, I have been making every possible effort with a great number of politicians, and they genuinely had my interest at heart and have done everything they can to get them to give me my money back. And they wouldn't do it. They said, no, this is a matter of national security. Well, if it's a matter of national security, and this happened in 1988, why haven't they been able to resolve whatever it is that's a matter of national security? Well, the fact is, of course, anybody with a brain would know I was just simply being punished. And I guess they thought that I would apologize and turn everything around and just walk away from Cathy and her daughter, which I would not do. My intention was to find them help, psychiatric help. And when I approached someone that had access to equipment that could have helped them a great deal and shortened the length of time of recovery, particularly for Cathy, I didn't know what they could do for the child because she was programmed in a different manner than her mother. They used equipment on her and trauma, and Cathy was strictly trauma. Cathy was started out, by the way, when she was just an infant. Her father was substituting his penis for her mother's nipple, and it was a multi-generational abusive family. Sexual abuse was the norm, and as a result, Cathy, it shattered her personality as a child, for the pain and everything else that went along with it, and as a result, she became a great candidate for the CIA's mind control projects, which were very active and going on full strength. And most of your listeners probably might not know this, Dr. Stan, but 11 years earlier, in 1977, Senator Frank Church had his hearings on mind control. and the MK Ultra program, and a lot of sub-programs. And he actually nailed the CIA to the wall, so to speak, on all this stuff. And the guy who the CIA had put it in charge to found the American Psychiatric Association, which is the #1 organ around the world for all psychiatrists to trade information, it was being run not only by a CIA officer who was highly paid. He was also taking all of everything that came through there, anything that was good. He just simply wouldn't allow it to go any further. So help for people under mind control, there was none. No private practitioner had any inkling of an idea how to help Cathy and her daughter.
Hold the thought there. Well, this is Dr. Stan. Well, anyway, of course, when Mark certainly realized what had happened, he took Cathy under his wing and wanted to help she and her daughter. And basically, of course, I suspect at the time when Cathy started to come out of this, why she wasn't thinking very clearly. And basically, of course, what they'd done is simply totally destroy her personality, her ability to think rationally as a human being. People say this couldn't really be going on. Well, Mark is pointing out that back in the early 1970s, Senator Frank Church held a series of congressional hearings or senatorial hearings on mind control. You can still get that up on the internet. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, our government, certainly agencies, these covert agencies, were working on how they could control people's minds. A lot of those techniques now have been transferred over. You'll see them on the television screen, or you'll see them in the movie screens. You'll see them used in our churches. You'll see them used in our educational system to control the mind of the American people. They used all different approaches, but the one they used with Cathy was most frightening because it involved personal torture, and basically used through the years. It's been it's really a very rewarding for me personally to see the dramatic improvement in Cathy, and actually to have interviewed her a number of times, and what a wonderful and charming woman. But this is the sort of thing that really happened. Well, of course, when Mark actually took Cathy out of this government program, they seized all of his bank accounts, over $2 million that he had accumulated, and he's never been able to get it back. That's 25 years ago. And so as a result, well, of course, Mark had to go off on his own, try to find out how he could help Cathy. Certainly there are methods that could be used, but he was blocked from being able to use them. So what eventually happened, Mark? How were you able actually to help her eventually?
Dr. Stan, a great deal of the therapy for persons like Cathy's victimization was trauma-based, was a psychological approach. It involved some hypnosis. It didn't involve it wasn't drug therapy at all. Actually, since I had watched it, I'd watched this process many times while psychiatrists were doing it not only here in the United States, but in Canada as well, when they were extracting information out of captured spies. This is how they got it. They didn't torture them, as you've been told, and the American public has been told ever since the Bush regime was in, and Dick Cheney stands up and says that without torture, we couldn't get any information. Nothing could be farther from the truth. You use torture to make people forget. You do not use torture to make them remember. There are all sorts of ways that you can get the information without any torture, of course, in being involved. And I had witnessed this many times. And I also watched some very nice, benevolent psychiatrists, well-informed, work with people who had been similarly abused like Cathy, and he actually brought them back to a normal way of thinking, and they carried on with a normal life. So I was pushed to the limit, because that, even though psychology was an extreme interest to me, and I had many hours of school, but I still wasn't prepared for this. I'm sure I use it as a thing of, I've flown in the cockpit of a 747 2 or 3 times. Could I fly one? No. Could I land one? No. Could I take one off? No. Well, I had the same problem with, I didn't want to do anything wrong and further damage Cathy or her daughter. Well, I found out I couldn't actually impact her daughter. That was going to take something very different. I had to first find out the truth from her mother, and the proverbial clock was ticking. So I managed to start what I thought was the right routine. I got some help on the phone. I was given 800 numbers to call with some frequency, and even though the calls were brief, I had my questions ready, and I got straight-up answers on everything. This was after I had whisked Cathy and her daughter off to the wilds of Alaska. I thought, well, if they kill me, somebody's going to know about it, because there's only one road in here and one road out. And if you come by boat, you're photographed 100 times, and if you come by air, you're photographed 100 times. Everybody that goes in and out of Alaska, unless they use the road, and once they get to the border, they're photographed again and again on that highway. So I took her there, and once she had recovered enough memory that I could turn it over to friends that I had working for U.S. Customs Enforcement and other branches of the military and other branches of branches of the military, and people I could trust that could actually take the information and actually pull together the hard proof that we needed to pursue the case. And we managed to get them. And we got a book. As a matter of fact, you sell it, Dr. Stan. It's Transformation of America.
Transformation of America. We'll be right back here. Well, Mark, you go right ahead.
Well, Dr. Stan, after about 9 months of intensive therapy with Cathy in Alaska, I couldn't allow her to watch any television. I couldn't allow her to get out of my sight. I couldn't allow her to read any books, read any newspapers, nothing, until I reached this magic point to where she had actually recalled enough information where I turned it over to my friend who had all the Southeast Asia, and I believe he had Australia and New Zealand as well. He was in charge of drug enforcement for U.S. Customs. I turned it over to him, and of course he turned it over to someone in where it could have and did happen, where Cathy was muling drugs in, and he was able to confirm it. And he found out that the fellow that was actually there was one guy involved who was masquerading as a customs officer. He was not a customs officer, but the CIA had appointed him to do this job to actually help pass the cocaine through U.S. Customs. So we're talking major quantities. And Alex Houston had a large motor home, and the thing had actually been modified so that the walls, there was about I think probably a 10-inch or 9-inch space between the wall and the outer shell of the entire motor home. And that was where the cocaine was stored. And I have no idea how many kilos it would hold. Cathy once told me how many, and I had a friend of mine who's a mathematician, got all the information together on how many feet there could have been in that particular motorhome. He said, "Hey, Mark, I think she's right." I said, "Well, that was a lot of cocaine, or heroin, or whichever it was, because some of the time it was heroin, most of the time it was cocaine." Where the money went, I'm sure it went right to the Caymans, and it also, some of it went in Alex Houston's pockets, and then some of it went in other places. But this money was dedicated and earmarked for all the black ops.
Hold that thought, hold that thought. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Mark certainly gives the background of Alex Houston, certainly selling drugs and making a great deal of money, a lot of this being used for black operations by the CIA. And that is, of course, why, Mark got into real trouble when he took over control of Cathy O'Brien, because she belonged to this man, one of the front men for the Central Intelligence Agency. And ladies and gentlemen, of course, this is all recorded in several books. One of them is Transformation of America, and that's That's TRANCE. Transformation of America. It's had 16 or more printings in English and printed in other languages as well. They've written another book, of course, Access Denied. And actually, Transformation of America was largely the testimony that was given before the Senate, as I remember, and basically immediately classified. The last thing they want is for the American people to understand what's going on. I would simply, if you don't think that we torture people, I would simply, you can look this up on the internet, but recently, Attorney General Holden had actually contacted his counterpart in Moscow and asked for the return of Edward Snowden. The American Attorney General asked that Edward Snowden be returned here. And of course, what the Attorney General of America said, and we promise we will not ask for the death penalty or torture him. We will not ask for the death penalty or torture him. And of course, if you don't believe that torture is standard, you need to get the report, Major General Taguba's report, on what happened at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. Major General Taguba lost his military profession because he told the truth about the torture, standard torture used certainly on the helpless prisoners over there, many of whom were tortured to death. You don't like to hear this sort of thing. I don't like to think of it either, except that it helps to understand that a group of very wicked people have seized the reins of power in Washington, D.C. And if we do not stand up, we become part of the problem, because men and women become accomplices to the evils they fail to appease. Now, basically, we carry the two books. One is Transformation of America. The other is Access Denied. They're very important books, and they're both available from our ministry by calling 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. Mark, how can people get to your website, get your information?
Well, they can go directly to TRANCE, T-R-A-N-C-E, and then the hyphen, formation.com. That'll take them there.
That's trans-formation.com. Go ahead.
Yes, and that will take them there, and they can get a briefing on what we were doing and what we're talking about in both books. Trance was actually written very hastily, because we had a federal judge retired at the time, and two really good lawyers, and I had a couple of friends in Washington who were members of Congress. These people all looked at what Customs and other federal and state law enforcement had been able to corroborate, and they put it all together, and it was, it was almost close to 20,000 pages. I know it was box after box after box of information, pictures, everything you could imagine. The bottom line was, when this information was viewed by the Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence Oversight, both in the House and the Senate, the 1947 National Security Act had already been imposed. So the people in both of those positions, they never saw anything. They were not able to read anything. So that was when the judge and the lawyers told us, quickly, we're going to go through this stuff, find the exact things that you can corroborate in front of a court of law, and we're going to put them all together. You write a book. Well, I told him, I said, I've never written a book in my life. I got a background in marketing, but not as an author. I can't do it. He said, well, Cathy will have to do it. I said, no, well, wait a minute. You're not considering she's been living in a invisible prison for all of her life. I don't even know how much education she got. So I practiced a little, you might say, a mind game with her, and she was typing at that time, and I'm not exaggerating, I think it was about 30 words a minute with probably 50 errors, and within a week she was typing over 100 words a minute, and the errors were just about zero, I think with one or two errors. She actually typed faster than that as time went on. So once I could get her to type, I started putting the whole thing together the best I could, and then she was helping me, and so I saw she was doing a whole lot better job than I was, and so I just let her run with it. Once she got it to where we could actually put it in a book form, we did. And we made sure that every member of both houses of Congress, everybody in federal law enforcement, and a few people at the Pentagon, and nobody at the CIA, or nobody at NSA, but we strictly wanted to get it into everybody's hands, and that included some of the parties that were being held. There was a Christmas party where George Bush Sr., his wife was handed a copy of Transformation of America. We did quite a bit of this stuff because we could get, I came out of psychological warfare, so I understood the principles. And the fact was, it was very easy for me to find people that didn't like their relatives or didn't like their in-laws. And once I found this out, I would hand them a book, and if they would, I would appreciate very much if they would deliver it for me. And if they could get a photograph or an audio recording of how they reacted, I would be even more pleased, and some of them did. So, and it wasn't just George Bush Sr., it was a whole lot of other people involved in that book as well, including Cathy's owner, Robert C. Byrd, who, and I think your audience should know that there is no such thing as party differences or anything dealing with these people feeling party-oriented. There is no party in Washington. I don't know how long it's been gone, but there is none, period. That's an illusion that they want you to think.
Now, you're talking about Senator Robert Byrd, and he was the senior senator. I don't know if he's still there, but...
No, he's dead, thank God.
Right. But basically, go ahead now. Cathy had some close relationship with Senator Byrd?
Yes. As a matter of fact, Senator Byrd was put in office in 1952 by his constituency, which was about 68% members of the Ku Klux Klan. They're the ones that got the money together to get him to run, and they put him in office, and they kept him in office. I always thought it was odd when I didn't think it was odd. I thought it was incredible when Obama was first starting to run for president, and all of a sudden Byrd speaks out, a Ku Klux Klan member, and says he is got to be our next president. And I told Cathy, I said, that fellow right there is going to be our next president. She says, I doubt that. I said, don't doubt it. It will happen. Byrd just told you. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. But going back, what happened after the court hearings, we went to state court, and this involved Kelly and Kelly's health and treatment.
No, this is Cathy's daughter.
Yes, it is. And the judge, he was a very decent person. I didn't know him personally, but I knew him by reputation. He was the senior fellow at Vanderbilt University. He was head of their law school. His credentials were impeccable. He could not be compromised. This I knew for certain. And everyone thought that we were going to be crucified by this fellow. And quite the opposite happened, because when he was approached by the intelligence community, and we did find this out, and I do have a recording of someone in his office talking about it, he said he had never caved in before. They would have to kill him. And he said, I'm not going to cooperate with this. And they said, well, we're going to impose a National Security Act on it. And that's going to shut you up and shut them up. So the judge did us the greatest favor on the planet. In open court, he placed us, or placed the 1947 National Security Act on our case, so that they could not proceed against us. No more harassment, couldn't happen. We couldn't sue them because everything we had was a matter of national security. So it became a standoff, and it is to this very day. And I told Cathy that, and Kelly as well, I said, the last breath I breathe, I hope I'm standing up telling somebody about what happened. I said, because as far as I'm concerned, everybody's got to know, and we never had any main supporters or anything. You helped us out a lot, Dr. Stan, by just selling those books. Of course, nobody can make a living off of selling books. That's unless you got a huge book deal with the main publisher. But we had to press these ourselves. We had gotten them out, and all of a sudden, word of mouth spread. Now we're in we're in the 16th English edition, going into the 17th pretty soon, real quick, and we're in 14 countries around the world, or 14 languages, and 55 countries, I believe, or 56 around the world. So trance and access denied are reaching the people. Access denied is exactly how I managed to rescue them, how I managed to help Cathy heal, and it does contain the entire treatment modality in a layman's terms of how Cathy was able to heal. Now, psychiatrists and psychologists all over the world are using that method and applying it to their patients as best they can, and it's working. There's also a treatment in there for post-traumatic stress disorder, because you can well imagine that anybody that's been tortured like Kelly had been, they were suffering PTSD. You can see a lot of white above their eyes, and the pupils of their eyes are so expanded they're just like jet black. That's somebody who is suffering from PTSD.
Well, basically the books, The Transformation of America, TRANCE, Transformation of America and Access Denied. They're very important books. They're both available by calling 1-800-544-8927, 1-800-544-8927. Go right ahead, Mark.
Well, the good news is that we had a lot of people in Washington, not only law firms, but I'm sure individuals, because law firms would not have been ordering that many books. We had hundreds of cases of books going to all sorts of legal offices in and around Washington. Of course, we know they were going to individuals, because I would imagine most of those law offices don't make a book like ours mandatory reading. But nevertheless, they did buy them. Well, the FBI, and particularly in the state of Alabama and Arizona, if I recall, those two states bought, unbelievable amounts of our books for federal agencies like that. I did find out, and I couldn't get it validated in hard proof, but I was told by someone that I trust that was an FBI officer that indeed the resident agents in charge were aware of some of the things that are in that book was correct. And so in his way of thinking was, if the worst part of it's correct, then the other stuff must be too. So they went on that, and that's how our book got around the world. And Cathy and I have traveled around the world 7 times now, completely around it 7 times in these years on speaking tour. We prefer to speak with doctors and mental health therapists, so the public is certainly, they're very interested in hearing this thing that has happened to our once great republic. And a lot of people, Dr. Stan, you've lived in South Africa, you lived in other places, you know that it's amazing how much knowledge someone has, just an individual, has more knowledge than our people here. I mean, I was reading the Hong Kong papers, and they were always filled with way more news than we got here, and they were talking about things that were happening in our government that nobody knew about in the United States. So I just saved the papers and brought them back with me and showed them to people. Sure enough, they were telling the truth. Our media was the first thing to go down, and by 1949, it was called Operation Cinderella, by the way. The CIA, being in reality, it was formed in 1947, the same year that 1947 National Security Act was formed. But by 1949, the CIA claimed that they actually had control of all of the major newspapers in the United States. That's a terrifying thing. And to think at that time, what sort of control are we talking about, and who knows about this? Well, I still wonder about that. I've heard various theories, but I don't know if, Catherine Graham knew about it. I don't know if any of these people that owned and ran these large newspapers, if they actually knew that they had people on the inside that were controlling everything.
Oh, I think Catherine Graham knew what she was doing, Catherine Graham of the Washington Post. And I think that certainly that basically a small group of people who have a different outlook on the world, they work together in concert to control the reality of the American people. Yes. And if you doubt that, you certainly need to get some of the things that I've written on The Brotherhood of Darkness. Certainly is an important book. We carry a wonderful book written by a professor, used to be at the University of California, professor of journalism. His name is Ben Bagdikian, Dr. Ben Bagdikian. His book, The New Media Monopoly, is vitally important. He certainly misunderstands what's going on, but he points out that certainly 30 years ago there were 50 major corporations that controlled the media. By the year 2004, there were 6 of them, and of course they basically controlled over 90% of the media. Of course, Professor Bagdikian thought it was the far right. The far right thinks it's the far left that controls the media, and they're both wrong. It's this little group which I call the Brotherhood. And we name names in our book. Our telephone number, 1-800-544-8927. You can get Galen Ross's book, Who's Who in the Elite, and Professor Ben Bagdikian's book, The New Media Monopoly, just by calling us at 1-800-544-8927. You need to get the information. You need to help us get it out. This becomes your responsibility, ladies and gentlemen. I can only do 5 hours of talk radio a day, but you can talk to people all the time. Our guest, Mark Phillips, a very courageous man. Well, Mark, we've got 3 minutes for you to wrap up the program.
All right, sir. Well, I appreciate the last word, sir. I think the comments that you just made very, very concisely about, this information now. Educate yourself to the details. Don't believe anything that Dr. Stan and I are telling you just on face value. You need to research it. The best way to research it is to read our book and understand and read Dr. Stan's book. Every bit of this information that Dr. Stan is talking about and the basic information of what we have outlined in detail is all, it's on the Internet, and it's accurate. It's in, you're looking into Freedom of Information Act files. There's some 17,000 pages of information available on the National Security Act, as well as MK Ultra. What I would like to see is that more people will read and actually just absorb what they've learned and tell one other person. If that's all they have to tell, just tell one other person that they trust and love, and then perhaps that person will tell someone that they trust and love, as many as possible. And Dr. Stan, we started out with only he and Cathy and her daughter knowing this, and then it's now blossomed into tens of millions of people, all by word of mouth. And I see no reason why your listeners can't follow your advice and read the books. Take the information. If you want to question it and you've got a little time, go on the Internet and just go to the federal government site. You can practically get everything validated right there. And the secret societies that Catherine Graham and others belong to, you can name them anything you want to, but the fact remains is that they are still a secret society, and they're not operating in our best interest, nor should they have control over us. So educate yourselves, and you will be able to help get this world back on track. I don't know. There's no way of fixing the government that we have in place. That's non-repairable. It's got to be, has to be evolved into something much different than it is now.
Amen to that. Basically, of course, we're involved in the spiritual battle, and we're not going to change this, but I believe the Lord can, if we are worthy of it. The question is America worth saving? Are the people here worth saving? Give our best to Cathy. God bless you, Mark. We'll talk to you real soon, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stan, and good evening.
Well, this is Dr. Stan. We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Mark Phillips. Oh, you can get his books, Transformation of America. He and Cathy wrote them together. And then, of course, Access Denied. The two books. If you're only going to get one, get Transformation. And then, of course, the second one, Access Denied. If you want to know how the media is controlled and who controls it, or the book would be, of course, The New Media Monopoly. The New Media Monopoly by Professor Ben Bagdikian, a left-wing professor. But the book is accurate, other than that he thinks the right wing controls the media. Of course, the people on the right think the left wing controls the media. And they're both wrong. The media is controlled by the Brotherhood of Darkness. And of course, you can get both the New Media Monopoly and my book, The Brotherhood of Darkness, by calling 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. There's so much information out there. If you'd like a list of the elite who rule us, we carry a book by Galen Ross, Who's Who in the Elite. Who's Who in the Elite? And of course, it'll take you into the membership of the Brotherhood of Darkness, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, and Sydney, it'll give you an excellent overview of who these subversive people are. Because this is a subversive movement, and it's intent upon creating a one-world government. If you'd like to know what Barry Goldwater said about it, we have used copies of his book, With No Apologies. And there he talks about the Trilateral Commission and how its goal is to seize control of the government of the United States. Certainly the one chapter on America's unelected rulers in Barry Goldwater's book is the most important chapter you'll ever read in any book. The book With No Apologies, it's available from Radio Liberty, used copies. And then, of course, if you want to understand the secret cabal and what their goal is, you need to read David Rockefeller's book. We have that. It's called Memoirs. And on page 405, he tells you about the secret cabal that he and his family belong to. And, of course, their goal is, of course, to change the structure of our society and to do away with the sovereignty of the United States. And basically, of course, he says that if people criticize us, but what would they have to do? Look how we've raised the living standards in China and India. And that's right. They have raised the living standards throughout the world, but they're in the process of lowering the living standards here. And they're really going to get ever so much better. In fact, very soon they're going to have certainly poverty throughout the entire world, equal poverty. Probably you'd be better off living in China when this whole thing comes down. But you need to read what David Rockefeller says about the secret cabal that he is part and parcel of. This is not imaginary. Our telephone number is 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. We hope you'll go to our webpage, radioliberty.com, where you can watch our DVDs, you can listen to our radio programs, live 4 hours a day, archived 24 hours a day. We want you to listen. We want you to get other people to listen, to understand that nothing is that appears to be. Everything is illusion and delusion, because, of course, they control the media, and they largely control what the American people think. We are not a democracy. We are a republic, because, of course, democracies always result in chaos, because people tend to vote for the men who promise them the most. And basically, the politicians, they don't want to raise taxes, they don't want to cut spending, and eventually the country goes bankrupt. And that's exactly where we are headed today. We're running up a deficit of somewhere, well, I think maybe this year it'll be $850 billion, but certainly Barack Obama increased the national debt about almost $6 billion in 5 years. This is not imaginary. It is really very, very real. And the average American doesn't understand this is what it's all about. They want to bankrupt America. And when they do that, they will destroy the value of your currency, your pension, your annuities, your long-term savings, your bonds, your stocks. Everything will be destroyed in this coming destruction of our currency. We're headed to difficult times. Our number is 1-800-544-8927. We certainly need your financial help. If you're in a position to join the Radio Liberty family of supporters, call us at 1-800-544-8927. But please pray for Radio Liberty.